Hi everyone, and welcome to this video lesson which is on the subject of complementary shapes, which is a pretty simple topic. Complementary shapes are simply two shapes that fit together. So when we have two shapes that fit together, we call them complementary. I've put a special note here because there's often a misconception. You need to note that they are not the same shapes. They are complementary shapes. So the two examples I'm using, a ball fitting into a baseball glove, those two shapes are complementary, one fits into the other. And a really common example is the lock and key. The key fits perfectly into the lock because they are complementary shapes. Note that if they were the same shapes, then they wouldn't fit together. It is the idea that they are complementary. Okay, so after seeing that first slide, you might be thinking, well, that's all good, but what on earth does that have to do with biology? Two shapes, one fits inside of the other, great. Does that have anything to do with biology? Well, guess what? It does. It's actually a critical concept for many different facets of biology, and that's what I'm going to talk about here on this slide with the use of a few diagrams. First of all, okay, here we have a pretty common example that you would have seen before, an enzyme and its substrate. Now, here's the enzyme here. It has a site which is called the active site, which is where it can catalyse a chemical reaction, and that chemical reaction will occur with a substrate. Notice the shape of the substrate is a perfect fit with the active site. Now, what do we call that? We call it complementary shapes. If the substrate is complementary to the active site, they will form the enzyme substrate complex and the reaction will occur. If the substrate is not complementary to the active site, it will not be able to form the enzyme substrate complex and the reaction will not be able to occur. Alright, second example. Staying with enzymes, we have the competitive inhibitor, the enzyme's worst enemy. The reason why a competitive inhibitor, here it is here, the reason why a competitive inhibitor is so effective is because here's our enzyme's active site, here's the normal substrate. Notice that the shape of the competitive inhibitor is very similar to the shape of the substrate. Therefore, it is complementary to the enzyme's active site, which means it can come in, block the enzyme's active site, the substrate can't bind, and no reaction can occur. Another example of complementary shapes, and in this case, it's where an inhibitor can stop an enzyme from working. Right, now we know there's also non-competitive inhibitors. Now, here's our non-competitive inhibitor down here. Its shape is not complementary to the active site, but it is complementary to an alternative site on the enzyme. So the non-competitive inhibitor comes in and binds at the alternative site, where it is complementary in shape. That then causes the enzyme to change shape. The active site is now distorted. It is no longer complementary to the substrate, so they do not fit together and the reaction does not occur. An example of where complementary shapes can have a drastic impact on enzyme activity. Okay, moving along. Down here we have what you may recognise as the cell membrane. We have the membrane of one cell here and the membrane of another cell here, made up of our phospholipids. And these big things here are membrane receptor proteins. And here we have some other membrane receptor proteins from our one cell membrane, another cell membrane. As you may or may not know, it's quite important that cells recognise each other, and they carry out this recognition using these receptor proteins. And how do these receptor proteins work? You guessed it, complementary shapes. So here we have a receptor protein, will recognise. Receptor protein will recognise. If they were different shapes, they wouldn't recognise. So that's how complementary shapes are important in this example. And here's just another example to highlight where we have some signal molecules which will be detected by the receptor protein in the cell membrane. And there it is there, being detected. Because they are complementary in shape, they do get detected. Other signal molecules, like this one, and this one, they are not complementary shapes to the receptor proteins, so they will not be detected by the receptor proteins, as you see here. This one doesn't fit correctly, so it will not be recognised as it is not a complementary shape. So receptor proteins and signal molecules, sometimes those signal molecules can be hormones and many other different types of chemical messages in an organism, and they are detected by membrane proteins using complementary shapes. Final example, one of the most important, hopefully all of you biology students out there are going to recognise this molecule. It's DNA. Now we know that DNA has its sugar phosphate backbone, and its most important component are these nitrogen bases, the A's, the T's, the C's and the G's. Now, you may or may not know that there's a rule called complementary base pairing. Well, there's that word, complementary. A pairs with T, G pairs with C, C pairs with G, T pairs with A, and they pair together using hydrogen bonding, but it is very much a case of complementary shapes is how they recognise each other. So A will have a complementary shape to T to recognise. G will have a complementary shape to C to recognise. And you can see they've tried to highlight that in this diagram here. If I just zoom in, you can see that they're showing you the G and the C having complementary shapes, and the T and the A having complementary shapes. Okay, so guys, that basically summarises this lesson on complementary shapes and their importance to biology. I've really only scratched the surface. There are so many applications and important times where complementary shapes are important within our subject area. Hopefully I've clarified for you that misconception that they are in fact shapes that one fits into the other. They are not the same shape. And hopefully now you'll be able to apply this to all of your biology studies. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.